This is your Morning Boost, recorded in the Forward Ed Network studios. A weekly spark for educators and school leaders ready to lead, teach, and live with greater intention. This is your Morning Boost.
You know what? I've spent a lot of time in classrooms this week, and I'll tell you something that I haven't been looking for. I'm not looking for November teaching, at least not yet, because it's August. And although that probably sounds a little strange, school has started. Shouldn't we be focused on instruction? Absolutely. But I think one of the biggest mistakes school leaders can make is expecting students and teachers to be in November when they're really only on day 3 or 4. When I walk into classrooms during this first week or two of school, I'm not really asking myself, how much content have they covered? I'm asking something very different. I'm asking, what foundation are they building? Because if we get that foundation right, the academics have somewhere to grow. If we rush past it, we often spend the rest of the year trying to rebuild what we skipped during the first week. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting the first week of school should be 5 days of icebreakers. I like kids. I wouldn't do that to them. And I'm also not suggesting that academics don't matter until September. In fact, if I'm being completely honest, earlier in my career, you probably could have accused me of saying exactly that. I remember telling staff, we don't need to do anything academic in the first week of school, just build school culture. One of my good friends and former colleagues believed the exact same thing, and for a long time, I really did. But looking back, though, I don't think the problem was our intent. I think we misunderstood what academic learning actually is. Academic learning absolutely can and should begin on day one. In fact, I think those first few days should give students a glimpse of the exciting learning that's waiting for them throughout the year. But while that's happening, teachers are doing something just as important. They're creating the kind of classroom where that learning can actually take root. They're getting to know students. They're establishing routines and helping everyone understand what it means to be part of this learning community. That's not separate from academic learning. It's preparing students for it. And that was the shift in my own thinking. I used to see relationship building and academic learning as two separate priorities. Now, I see one as creating the conditions for the other. That's a very different way of thinking about the first week or two of school. Classrooms aren't just covering content, they're becoming communities. And that's incredibly important work because it shapes everything that follows. I'll admit, I always enjoy it when research confirms something that I've experienced as a practitioner, and this is one of those moments. John Hattie's visible learning research identifies teacher-student relationships as a meaningful positive influence on student achievement. Now, I don't bring that up because I think relationships are another initiative that schools need to adopt. I bring it up because it reinforces something I've come to believe over the years. Relationships aren't separate from learning. They're the environment learning depends on. Think about what we're asking students to do every day. We are asking them to wrestle with ideas that they don't fully understand yet, share their thinking with others, make mistakes and accept feedback, and keep going when the work gets difficult. Every one of those things becomes easier when trust already exists. That's why I don't think relationships compete with academics. They prepare students for academics. So when I'm walking classrooms during these first few days, my lens is a little different. I'm paying more attention to the culture that's being built than the content that's being covered. How are students being welcomed? How are mistakes being handled? What routines are taking shape? Those things may not show up on next Friday's assessment, but they're going to influence what happens in that classroom between now and May. That's why I don't see the first week of school as a time taken away from instruction. I see it as an investment in every week of instruction that's going to come. And that brings me to what I think is the bigger leadership question, because when we walk out of those classrooms, what we choose to notice teaches something too. And that's where I want to go next.
This segment is sponsored by Grunmeyer Leader Services. Since 2013, GLS has been a trusted partner for school districts across the Midwest, specializing in executive recruitment and leadership support. They believe that great schools start with great leaders, and they are here to help you find the perfect fit for your district. Transform your school's future with the right leader. Visit GrunmeyerLeaderSearch.com to learn more. Grunmeyer Leader Services, transforming education one leader at a time.
When we think about instructional leadership, we often focus on what we're looking for during a walkthrough. But I think there's another question that's just as important. What are we teaching while we're walking? Because every walkthrough teaches twice. It teaches students and it teaches teachers. Let's face it, I don't care how quiet you are or how much ninja training that you've endured, students will notice when a principal walks into the room. But teachers notice something else. They notice what we pay attention to. They notice what we ask about, what we write down, what we mention before we leave. And they'll also notice what shows up later in an email or a conversation. I've used a phrase throughout much of my leadership career, and if you're a returning listener to this program, I'm sure that you've heard me use this phrase before. What we permit, we promote. I still believe that's true. If something consistently happens in our organization and we choose not to address it, we've quietly communicated that it's okay, it's acceptable. But over the last few years, I've realized there's another side to that idea. And although that first quote is still very true, also what we acknowledge, we promote. Leaders teach people what matters by what they choose to notice. Let me explain this a little better. Imagine I walk into a classroom during the first week of school. The teacher is standing at the door, they're greeting every student by name. I watch them notice a student who's sitting by themselves and they intentionally invite them into a group. I notice a student makes a mistake. The teacher responds calmly, protects the student's dignity, and turns it into a great learning opportunity. Maybe a transition gets a little messy, but instead of becoming frustrated, the teacher stops and reteaches the routine and lets students practice it again. That's really important work. Now, imagine when I leave that classroom later that afternoon, I send the teacher a note or an email, and the only thing I mention is that I didn't see today's learning target posted. Now, I'm not saying that learning targets don't matter, because they do. Academic expectations matter and instructional quality matters as well. Absolutely. But out of everything that I observed, I chose one thing to reinforce. Whether I intended to or not, I just taught that teacher something about what I value as a leader. That's the hidden curriculum of instructional leadership. Our feedback, our attention, our questions, they all teach. Sometimes even what we fail to mention teaches. If I spend August telling my staff that relationships matter, but every walkthrough conversation is about pacing, I've communicated something. If I tell teachers that routines are critical, but I criticize them because they haven't reached chapter 2 by Friday, I've communicated something else. Leadership messages don't just come from official meetings and email. They come from the hundreds of little moments that happen throughout the year. That's why I think these first walkthroughs matter so much. They are not just observations, they're opportunities. When I walk into a classroom and see a teacher intentionally learning students' names, I need to tell them that I noticed. When I watch a teacher redirect a student in a way that preserves that dignity or stop and reteach a routine instead of getting frustrated, I need to acknowledge it. And in fact, I need to reinforce it. Leadership doesn't always require a formal observation. Sometimes it just requires one sentence. I saw that. That matters. Hey, keep doing that. Those may be some of the most important words that a principal says all year. Because every time we acknowledge something, we are helping define what excellence looks like in our school. Now, that doesn't mean we ignore instructional concerns simply because it's August. I mean, of course not. If I walk into a classroom and I see something that requires immediate attention, I'm still the instructional leader. I'm going to need to address it. But the context matters and timing matters. The lens that we use during week 1 should be different from the lens we use in November. As we move into week 2 or week 3, my instructional expectations begin to grow. Now I'm paying closer attention to those learning targets or to student thinking and academic discourse. I mean, who's doing the heavy lifting in the lesson right now? What does that level of cognitive engagement look like? The foundation that we spent the first week or so building, that should now be supporting increasingly rigorous instruction. That's not lowering expectations, it's sequencing them. It's understanding that great teaching doesn't begin with content. It begins by creating an environment where students are ready to learn. As we wrap up today, I want to come back to where we started. This week, I've been walking classrooms, and I've been seeing teachers doing exactly what I hoped they would be doing. They're learning names, they're building routines, they're helping students understand what it means to be part of our classroom community. They're creating environments where students can begin taking those academic risks. That's very important work. Next week, my lens will start to shift. I'll start paying closer attention to the academic work that's happening within those classrooms. I'll be looking more intentionally at that student thinking or the cognitive engagement or really that quality of instruction. And that's exactly where we should be headed, but I don't want us rushing past that foundation just so that we can say that we've covered more content. There's a long school year ahead of us. We're going to have plenty of opportunities to talk about instructional strategies and assessment or look at student work and really, really isolate that academic rigor. All of that matters, but none of it happens in isolation. It happens inside the relationships and routines that we take time to build. It happens inside classroom communities where students believe it is safe to learn. That's why I don't think the first week of school is time taken away from instruction. It's an investment in every week of instruction that follows. And I think principals play an important role in protecting that investment, not because we're the ones building every classroom relationship, because we're not. Teachers do that work every single day, but we influence what gets prioritized because every walkthrough teaches twice. It teaches students and it teaches teachers what leaders value. So here's the question I'd leave you with this week. The next time you walk out of a classroom, ask yourself, what did or what will my feedback teach that teacher I value? Not what I intended, what did it actually teach? Because if relationships really matter, if routines really matter, if classroom culture really matters, then those things should probably show up in our feedback too. Not just in our strategic plans or in the words that we use before students arrive, but in the quiet conversations we have with teachers every single day, one classroom at a time. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me this morning. I hope this has been a great month of August. For those of you who don't have your kiddos in the front door yet, I wish you luck when they do arrive. For those of you like me who've already been rolling along, hey, we got this. Keep up the good work. We'll see you next time on your Morning Boost.
That's your Morning Boost from AWB Education and Media. If this episode helped you reset your thinking or take your next step forward, share it with a colleague. And don't forget to subscribe so your next boost is ready when you need it. Keep showing up with intention. Keep moving forward, and we'll see you next time.